Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, April 25th, 2025. This week's Chairman's Report is written by Jade Walle, a practicing CPA who has been on the Americans for Fair Taxation Board of Directors. Be smart. Pay zero taxes. I read a recently released book by Mark J. Kwan entitled Be Smart. Pay Zero Taxes. The book was extremely interesting and outlined how to use the buy, borrow, and die strategy to get rich and stay rich. Mr. Kwan highlights what most financial planners would describe as an unusual approach to minimizing our U.S. income tax liability. A key premise throughout the book was that avoiding any and all income tax liability was a high goal to strive for. It was a fascinating read, and I highly recommend the book. However, after finishing its 306 pages, it struck me that virtually none of Mr. Kwan's brilliant and thoughtful analysis, planning, and well-thought-out techniques would be necessary if the fair tax was the law of the land. I thought about how Mr. Kwan's energy and insights could be redirected and employed for other amazing work helping people with financial planning. Now, Mark takes a different angle on investments, especially investments that usually appreciate and gain value relative to the money that we so liberally print in this country that loses value over time due to inflation. With stocks, ETFs, real estate, cryptocurrency, and precious metal investments, Mr. Kwan's strategy is to absolutely never sell your investments because they usually trigger capital gains taxes. He further advises investors to borrow against these assets and buy more of these appreciating assets. Again, I applaud the out-of-the-box thinking here, but if the fair tax were the law of the land, there would be no capital gains taxes, and the strategy would not have to be so dogmatic. Mr. Kwan would then be free to advise people on true quality investments, making buy, hold, and sell decisions based on risk, business need, and opportunity. Drastic measures designed solely to avoid the tax man would no longer be necessary. Now, I don't think we realize how many gyrations, undulations, rotations, twirling, and whirling that financially astute Americans go through to legally avoid income taxes. The National Taxpayers Union Foundation reports that Americans spend 6.5 billion hours each year complying with the tax code, and I have to believe that number is woefully underreported. Just think about Mr. Kwan's book here. At least 2/3 of his research and strategy formulation could fall into this tax compliance or tax planning bucket. Like the frog that dies in a pot of water when the heat slowly rises, are we all being slowly boiled to death by the IRS and the income tax system? Do we even realize the pain, turmoil, and effort we all expend to comply and plan for the income tax each year? I don't think we do. To help shock us back into reality, let's just think about how life with the fair tax would be. First, for Mr. Kwan's sake, there would be no more capital gains taxes since the fair tax taxes consumption, not productive efforts. Virtually all of the book would be rendered inane. I guess it goes in the goodwill pile now. And further, there would be no IRS, no income tax filings of any kind, no corporate tax returns, no individual tax returns, no estate filings, no gift tax returns, and the list goes on. Now, only a small percentage of our U.S. businesses that sell at the end-user consumer level would need to collect and remit the fair tax, and they already have systems in place to do this for state sales taxes. Consequently, the incremental lift here is negligible at most. Illegal tax evasion plummets to an almost de minimis level with the fair tax relative to the $1 trillion in annual U.S. illegal tax evasion we see with the income tax. Our government spending is more transparent, as federal spending that's currently disguised in the form of reduced Treasury receipts, i.e. deductions, exemptions, credits, exclusions, loopholes, etc., they're all gone. With the fair tax, if politicians are asked how they intend to get the money for any new spending they propose, there are only two answers. We'll go into more debt to fund this shiny new thing, or we'll raise the fair tax rate on our U.S. citizens. I wish all politicians luck in selling a new product with the latter strategy. In the end, I absolutely loved Mark Kwan's book. It kept me riveted on multiple legs of an international flight journey, and I couldn't put it down. But this got me to thinking about how there might be many other areas in our lives that the income tax invades into, robbing us of our precious time, productivity, and creative thinking skills. A million likely things come to mind for all of us, but if the fair tax were the law of the land, you wouldn't be spending time right now reading this chairman's report, and I wouldn't have had to spend any time writing it because when the fair tax passes, our job is done. There will be no more need for a weekly CR. Now, this is just one example we probably would never think about, so let's all wake up together and jump out of this boiling pot before it's too late. In conclusion, one of the things that a real change to our tax system must address is how it affects the various elements of our society. Jade has done an excellent job of demonstrating how the fair tax will dramatically address not only how we plan investments, but spend our time. Now, many of you have labored tirelessly for freedom from the federal income tax and the IRS. You deserve a great deal of credit for your efforts to educate the American people on the need to fund the American government in a way that's good for America and returns freedom to the American people. It's imperative, though, that we don't replace the current income tax and the IRS with an alternative system that can still be manipulated by the ruling elite. We must let Congress and the President know the best way to replace the income tax and the IRS is with the fair tax. Now, make no mistake about it. The fair tax is a grave threat to the ruling elites. It will strip them of their power and their ability to control us through the tax system. Their opposition to the fair tax will be fierce and unrelenting. And don't think for an instant they won't use half-truths, deception, and downright lies in their desperate attempt to hang on to their power. However, with the support of this president, we can finally eliminate the income tax and the IRS. Now, of course, the best course of action is not only to repeal the income tax and abolish the IRS, but to repeal the 16th Amendment as well, so no future administration can ever shackle the American people with an income tax again. We must come together and ensure that real tax reform, the fair tax, is not subverted by the elites in D.C. This will take the diligent efforts from all of us. We need your financial assistance, and we need your grassroots assistance. Now, if you have contacts that will allow us to get more information about the fair tax to President Trump, please let us know. Also, please email us at info@fairtax.org, and we'll give you some options on how you can best help us. At a minimum, please call your congressional representative and ask if he or she supports the fair tax. If so, thank him or her for their support and suggest they become a co-sponsor of H.R. 25 if they're not one already. If not, ask why not. If your representative claims to be unfamiliar with the fair tax, offer to have someone come to their office and explain it to them. The solution? Pass the fair tax. Now, why would D.C. pass the fair tax and give up an almost unlimited source of donations? Well, they won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. Isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system and the IRS along with it? Help bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or actually investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to FAIRtax.org to invest in AFFT and help us pass the fair tax. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.